And we are live. So, welcome to the Chronic Comeback podcast. Today, I'm really excited to have on the show Mez Gallifuoco. Did I pronounce that correctly?
You did so well. That's perfect.
Awesome. I practiced that about at least 20 times before we started. Okay. Just before we get into it, I'd just like to, just give a bit of an introduction to yourself and kind of how I came across your story. I came across numerous articles online talking about your story. Diagnosed with MS at 18. It's told that she'd be in a wheelchair whole life, wouldn't be able to walk. Basically, her life was over. Rather than accept this as her future, Mez took matters into her own hands, taking control over her own recovery, and went on to surprise doctors with her unbelievable improvements, but also impress everyone around her by launching and building 4 businesses, which I found equally as impressive, including 2 successful 7-figure exits, one of which at age 23, which is even more impressive for someone like me when I think about what I was up to at age 23, I don't want to go into that. All of which... Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about it later. All of which whilst you're dealing with the mental and physical effects of chronic illness. So I love hearing about people like Mez because it gives me so much motivation that on the days where I feel like crap and doubt whether I can launch my own business and even do this podcast, for example, there's evidence of someone like her that I can look to as an example of what's possible. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. You just made me sound like a superhero. That was awesome.
Well, yeah, that's my job. That's my job. So look, dialing it back a little, I just want to take it back to kind of before you got symptoms and before your diagnosis, from a health perspective, and I guess your life. What was it like before? And then maybe just talk us through kind of initially finding out that something was wrong, the diagnosis, and then also just the mental and physical elements that went with that.
Yeah. Well, I was very young for as far as multiple sclerosis goes. The average age, I think, is between 32 and 36 years old, and it affects predominantly women. So I'm in that category, but it's very rare to have symptoms at 18. So, I mean, what I was doing prior to that was being a teenager. I just finished high school and I was prepping for university. And I think I was trying to decide whether I wanted to take a year off, I guess. And randomly I got pins and needles in both my feet, and I thought it was a back issue. My family has chronic back pain, and we had a chiropractor friend of the family, and basically he came over and was checking everything, and as he was testing things, he realized that my pins and needles were in both my legs, which is usually not a pinched nerve. A pinched nerve will be on one or the other. He immediately sent me to go see a doctor, and then from there it went to neurologist. Within like a week, the suspicion of MS was kind of announced, and everything happened very quickly. But I mean, before that, I was genuinely just in school and I was being a teenager, probably up to no good in many ways. But it was not something, as far as health goes, I didn't really think about health that much. Outside of more the vanity aspects of it, I wasn't really someone who was super health conscious. I was just being an 18-year-old. Yeah.
You're not really health conscious at 18, are you?
No, I think I was more like body conscious as a woman, but I wasn't health conscious at all. Yeah.
And so you got the diagnosis. So what was that like from a mental point of view at that stage? Obviously, up until the age of 18, in comparison, the kind of problems you must have had to deal with were insignificant to that.
Completely. Yeah. Completely. I actually remember the moment I was at the neurologist's office, and I was sitting there, and I had my boyfriend at the time who just went everywhere with me because I was 18. And I had this neurologist across from me, and he said, we think there's an inflammation in the brain. And it was this like really like quite cinematic moment where I had an out of body experience, and everything went slow. and I could hear him speaking to me, but it had hit me so hard that they had found like lesions in the brain and lesions in the spine, and I hadn't brought my parents because I didn't think it'd be that serious. And I remember that it was so impactful. It was so like shocking to me. It was one of those few moments in my life where it was actually pure shock. Outside of maybe some moments where I've had grief or lost someone, it was really like, where you stop and you think, is this real? Like, this can't be happening to me, which I think everyone thinks at the moment of diagnosis, like this can't actually be happening to me. And then after, what I found was I have a really big Italian family, and they're all very passionate and we're all very close. And I just remember them being devastated and being very, very distraught. And for some reason, I'm not sure why, but my 18-year-old self had this moment where I feel like I could have easily gone into victimhood, because it would have been quite simple to just, fall apart. But I think I saw my parents and I saw what my family was going through, my brothers, and I just went into like hero mode, and I went into, everything's going to be okay. We'll figure out a way to deal with this. And, looking back at it, I think that's maybe a little bit of naive courage, but that's why I'm kind of grateful I was diagnosed at 18, because I think when you're diagnosed at the average age of like 32 and 36, your life is established. You may have kids already, and the impact of that is tremendous. Whereas at 18, I was quite malleable. I could really grow around the diagnosis. And I think I said to you when we spoke earlier as well, I feel that my character almost molded around it. I don't know who I would be without MS because I got it so young.
Yeah. It's really interesting actually that there are people with chronic illness that go through a period where they don't ever get a diagnosis. So they're just constantly trying to guess what they've got going on. But then also someone like yourself who had that kind of pivotal, horrible moment. Because I actually went to see a neurologist myself and had the test result, and I was the opposite of you. I'd actually geared myself up that I definitely had it. And
really?
and just went through that, and I can't imagine how that would have felt at that point, to go through that. But I guess, so once you'd gone through that and you were out on the other side, you've taken the amazingly mature approach of saying, we're going to get through this. We're going to find a way. What were the steps you took then to kind of improve your situation?
So, I mean, I think I'm a natural researcher. As far as when I see a problem, I go into research mode. And at the time, I was studying to be a psychotherapist. And my instinct was to like, I was in the first year of university, I'd enrolled in it and everything. And my instinct was, no, I'm going to do medicine. I'm going to study to go into it. I'm going to try and research as much as I can about multiple sclerosis. And then I'm going to see what support groups are out there. That I think was my way of, I guess, dealing with the shock. I think we all deal with denial and we all deal with these emotions differently. My way was just learning as much as I could. But at the time, there wasn't a lot of information. This was also pretty early, like social media, pretty early internet days still. Like you would research, but you didn't have access to as much. And I remember finding some support groups, and I went maybe twice. And it was just because it was just not the help that I kind of wanted. It was very much everyone sitting in their own, not to sound, I don't want to offend anyone, but it was very much sitting in the emotion of misery, maybe is the word.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really the emotions and the support that I was after. And so I really tried hard to find like-minded people, but I couldn't. But I reached out to the different foundations. I tried to get as involved as possible. About 2 years after that, I ended up getting into medical school. So I enrolled in that, was there. And then I ended up transferring back to psychology, because in my mind, psychology is a huge part of dealing with chronic illness. Almost more than the medical side of it, because I feel like if your mindset is in the right place, then you can really deal with anything.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think my way has always been to learn as much as I can about it, to be educated. I don't really like just putting my future and my trust in another person who's wearing a lab coat to just tell me what my future is. I like to at least know. I really believe we are competent. We are educated. You know, we have the ability to make our choices. You know, and we want to make evidence-based decisions, and that's kind of what I was going after. So my instinct was just to do that. But then I just feel like I was really lucky. I've always had relapsing remitting MS. So thankfully. So I will get MS symptoms, and if I look after myself, and I did some treatments, I was on some medication. If I look after myself in the right way, then it kind of goes back into remission, and that happened a few times in my early 20s. While I was at university, I refused to take time off university, which in hindsight was silly because it took me a lot longer to graduate, and it was a lot of stress on myself because I've always also been very ambitious. So marrying the chronic illness, I guess, with my ambition was the battle of my 20s, because I feel like I refused to take it easy. And the lesson I think that you get from chronic illness is to look after yourself. And I don't think I was very good at looking after myself. I was always kind of pushing forward and building businesses, as you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of how I handled it. I handled it with just trying to use it as fuel, but also be very, very educated on the whole illness in itself.
Well, I guess there's an element of pushing through things that actually then aids your like recovery and you feeling better. Because what I hear from that is, and it resonates so much with me, is that you wanted to, and I talked about it in the last episode actually, about almost being competitive with what your disease or what you've got going on, because you're like, screw that, I'm not letting this be stop me from living a normal life. And that's what you were doing at university by the sounds of things. You were like, no, this isn't going to slow me down. Is that right?
Completely. And I actually saw that happen. My last relapse was about 3 years ago, and it was probably the worst one. So I basically was in Bali, and over the course of 2 days, both my hands stopped working. Like, they started with pins and needles, and then they genuinely wouldn't lift up. I couldn't grab things. I couldn't grab my suitcase. We had to rush back to Australia. And it was, a really dire situation where I came back to Australia. I basically realized when I was in hospital, my parents were in Europe for the holidays. It was Christmas. I was not here, but in Australia with my partner. And when I was in hospital, I found out I was also pregnant. And the problem was that I obviously can't receive treatment while I was pregnant. So I had this choice between using my hands again and keeping a pregnancy. And it was all very emotional and very dark and, very difficult. I couldn't feed myself for about 2 weeks. I was in hospital. I was on loads of medication, and it would have been so easy for me to kind of spiral into a dark place. But I immediately went into problem solving mode. So I immediately went into, okay, I'm going to get software on my computer that's voice activated. I'm going to, practice all this stuff. And it really was not so much a battle between me and MS, but almost a motivation to go, like, screw this. There's no way this is holding me back. Like, I'm going to work around it. I'm going to figure out a way. Like, and you see that kind of spark up in yourself. I think if there's any sort of blessing with these chronic illnesses and these like challenging times, is that you get to see parts of yourself that just become this like hero. And that has developed so much respect for myself over the years because of those situations.
Definitely. Were there any times where, because you've had a lot of kind of like crossroads, it seems like, if you'd have taken a different path, your life could have been completely different. Were there any times where you were veering down that kind of darker path? And because it sounds like you've almost at every point you've gone the right way, but were there any points where you did have to really dig yourself out of it because you had started to go the other way?
Oh, completely. And if you look at the research, depression with chronic illness and especially with MS is very common, right?
Yeah.
It's very difficult. It's a very difficult challenge to deal with something that has no end to it. When you compare it to something that's like an acute illness, cancers and everything, you have real solutions there, or you have, endpoints that you can kind of measure and parameters. With something like MS, where they don't tell you what it is, everyone's like, we think we know what we don't know. And it's been, 15 years that you've had it, but we still don't really know what it is. And we don't really know how to treat it. And we don't know when it'll attack or when it won't, or whether it will or whether it won't. There's so much ambiguity in that is really difficult on your mental state. Every day is a what if.
Yeah.
And I know that normally with life, every day is a what if. But I feel like you really feel it with multiple sclerosis, or you feel it with a chronic illness in general. And you have to sit there and really work on your resilience. And I think there's been many times where I've been faced with, do I fall prey to that darkness? And I've definitely had dark days. I've definitely had moments where I have fallen apart, where I've, cried for days, where I've just gone, I don't think I can do this. But I think you learn to manage those moments. And that's what I've kind of learned is, what do I need in those moments? I'm not going to deny the fact that it is difficult. I'm going to allow myself to feel that. But then it's, you have these choices of perspective. Which perspective would you like to take?
I think, yeah, you summed it up so well there in terms of the not knowing. The thing that I find frustrating about that is that, so with acute illnesses, quite often it's like, if you do X, you will achieve Y, and
Yeah.
it's not guaranteed, but it's proven. There's a lot there. Whereas when you look at chronic health stuff, I mean, God, all the stuff I've done, I've done on pure just hoping, on faith that something will, close my eyes and hope that one of it will work. Things like a 3-week water fast. I've just done all of these kind of crazy stuff with just hoping that one of them will hit. And when it doesn't, it's kind of soul destroying. But I think really what I get from what you're saying as well, and it resonates a lot for me, is that having something to work towards, and not just sitting there and kind of hoping that one day something will click and you'll wake up and it won't be there. Actually working towards something, for me, helps a lot. And it sounds to you're maybe more on the research side of things, you have to be working towards, but having that something that you're working towards really helps. Is that the same with you?
Yeah, no, and I think that's in general with humans. Like, I
Yeah.
think as humans, what makes us happy is working towards something. It's not necessarily achieving it, it's that we always have something to strive for. But I think with the research part, for me, it's just more like, how much can I learn? I do this with everything, though. I love to learn. So I will always be a curious person. I think learning for me is progress in itself, because I'm progressing in my knowledge in a way. And then for me, it's like striving towards something. There's definitely a disappointment when like you said, when you try one of those things and it doesn't really work. Some of the things for me have been really unpredictable, and I've learned to live with that lack of predictability and that ambiguity. But I'll try different diets, hoping like the research says this, and then nothing happens. And then I'll have instances where I'm completely not that healthy and not thinking about it, but I'm really happy, and I'll have. And so for me, it's like learning about how I individually work with this illness. I think we're all very individual. I don't think there's a one size fits all, diet that will help chronic illness or any of that. But I think it's learning about when you feel good and when you don't feel good, and what's important to you. But for me, definitely like progress and striving towards something is what has kept me focused. It's kept my head above water. It's kept me in a really good mental state, with regards to dealing with MS. I also have a really random relationship with MS. Like, I talk to it, which is so weird.
I love that.
But I don't think, like this, this terrible disease. I think it's part of my body that's in balance. And I think it's ironic that, and quite metaphorical, that multiple sclerosis is your body attacking itself. You literally are your own worst enemy. And so I kind of choose to take that as a personified lesson in my life, and think, okay, well, how can I be kinder to myself? How can I speak to my body when it's, when it's acting up? How can I calm my body down? What can I give it to it that will make it feel loved and feel calm and feel stress-free? And that's kind of how I choose to approach it.
Yeah, I think that's I think you, and a lot of those things, I imagine, you know, you never would have, well, you might have done, but maybe you would have come to those realizations a lot later on in your life had
Yeah.
you been in a different situation. One thing I want to kind of talk about the entrepreneurial side of things, mainly because it really interests me. So hopefully it interests other people as well. But the fact that so you're doing all this research at an unbelievably young age, which I just find incredible. And you're going through like a really tough time and you just decide to launch businesses. What went through your mind to kind of to to do that? Why would you not just think, oh, I just let me get a job that will, I'll work 10 hours a week, I'll get the minimum wage and I'll just focus on getting better? Why did you think, oh, what, where did that come from that you were like, right, no, I'm going to launch a huge businesses?
I'd say probably a few places. My family's quite entrepreneurial. They've never really worked for other people. They own restaurants and shops and clothing shops and everything. And I also think it was a little bit of ego because I'm not someone who likes to be held back. So I've always been someone who's naturally ambitious. And so with MS, I kind of used it more as a fuel to work forward. So I think, maybe if I hadn't been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at 18 to 25, I would have just been traveling and working for other people and just studying and then gone, yeah, then I'll launch my businesses. But because of MS, I felt this sense of, I don't know how much time I have, which is both a blessing and a curse. But I was constantly going, okay, I need to focus, I need to work hard. Basically what happened was I come from a family that is entrepreneurial on one side, very artistic on the other side. And so when I was studying psychology, it was very science heavy. And basically I wanted to do something quite artistic or something a bit more creative. And at the time it was blogs. Blogs had just come on and there was a lot of photography and everything that had happened. So I decided that I wanted to do that. I started like a blogger account. If I don't even know if that's still around, Blogger, but it was a blogger account pre-WordPress. And basically it was really simple and I could only get a really beautiful site. I wanted to compete with the other people. And I was like, I really want a beautiful website, but I couldn't afford obviously a developer. So I basically went to university during the day and at nighttime for about 6 months, I was watching YouTube videos on how to code. And I just learned to code in about 4 different languages.
Hang on,
And
how old were you at this point?
I
How
was
long after?
22, I think.
So 4 years, and were you still figuring stuff out at this point, health wise, or were you a bit more
Yeah,
stable?
I was on interferon medication for like 2 years. So weekly injections, intramuscular. And I was going to university during the day and then I was coding at night. So I was so hyperactive. I don't
That's
know where I got this
amazing.
energy. I'm much now with my businesses and my ventures, but I
Yeah.
just wanted to do everything back then. And so I think I'm just someone who really loves to learn. And I
Mm.
also am one of those people who likes to adopt skills. I don't know if anyone else is like that, or I'm just a weirdo, but when you just want to learn everything and just like, I want to do photography and coding and graphic design. And I was also studying at the same time. So it was just, I had no life except, doing stuff. But yeah, basically I learned to code. I fell in love with coding. The blog became really successful. It was like in the top 10 fashion blogs in Australia for about 2 years. And I was doing stuff around that with PR. And then I was coding at the same time. And then I was studying at university. And my parents own a restaurant and a cafe. And so people who come in there who would say they would need a website, my mom would be like, oh, my daughter's a coder and she does this. I ended up building these websites. And then I got so much business that I was like, I'm just going to start an agency. And so I was at university and I started a digital marketing agency where I was building websites and I was doing traffic to those websites just from what I'd learned from the blog as well. And that just by fluke, I got Nickelodeon as one of my first clients because one of my friends at university was interning with them and they last minute needed a graphic design vector file or something. And I ended up doing it over like 1 hour because I didn't know what I was doing basically. So basically she called me and was like, we need we need a vector file converted to a PNG, which is just some, turning different files. Can you do that? And I just went, yeah, of course. And I hung up the phone, and then I immediately Googled like how to turn a vector file into a PNG. Ended up getting them as a client, and it just kind of catapulted from there. I ended up going into startups. I ended up going into some incubators. I was building apps. I was working with all these different technology companies at the same time, and ended up selling that business, and ended up in New York when I was 24 or 25. And I was director of growth hacking for a Y Combinator company, which is a tech incubator in Silicon Valley. And the rest is history, basically.
So,
yeah.
Throughout these points, did you have people around you saying, like doctors and friends saying, you need to slow down, you need to focus on your health?
I think everyone has always been confused about my my existence and the way that I do things. I think there have been multiple times that doctors have really been confused and said, why are you doing so much? Like your illnesses could be getting worse. It could be doing this and that. But I always had a trust in my own perception of my illness. And I've had that since I've been diagnosed, that no one will know more than I know about myself and my body.
Yeah.
And obviously there are tools like MRIs that will tell us the progress. And, I trust in the scientific method and everything. But I think at the end of the day, you have to trust yourself and your own relationship with your illness, and see how it goes. And I think I definitely had doctors saying slow down. I think my parents have always been confused about what I do, because the technology field is so different to what they're used to.
Yeah.
But as long as I'm okay, I guess they never told me to slow down. But yeah, I've had a lot of doctors with confused looks going like, sorry, you're doing what? And where are you going? Where are you moving to? Like,
so I guess there's probably going to be people listening to this thinking, I'm not naturally like that. I've never, I mean, there's an element of me, like, God, when I was, as I said, I hadn't even had my first proper full-time job. Obviously I'd had jobs. I went traveling and stuff like that. So, at that age, I wouldn't even dream of being able to do all that research and just stay as positive as you've been. And I reckon there's probably going to be people listening to this saying, that's great for you. But like for me, kind of in my mindset, like what I guess for people like that, and maybe you've spoken to people in the past who say that maybe they're not naturally like you, what kind of advice would you give to them in their own kind of, in their own dark places right now, going through chronic illness?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to preface it with the fact that I was diagnosed very early and very young. So a lot of that was naivety. Like a lot of that, not realizing the severity of it maybe was a naive, push forward. I think when you're younger, you think you're invincible. So I still had that. When I speak to people who are a little bit older and going through chronic illness, and, I give a lot of talks because I'm an ambassador for MS Research Australia. So there's a lot of opportunities for me to actually speak to people who've been diagnosed. I think for me, it's constantly reminding people that this is a perspective. Everything in life is a perspective, right? And this is very tough and it's not easy. And, it isn't something that anybody is saying you should just, ignore or work through. You need to obviously look at it and see how you feel about it and work through those feelings. But I think for me, this is a very mental thing. And I think most people need to sit down with what is a physical illness and look at the mental aspects of that. How do you feel? Are you dealing with this diagnosis? The diagnosis can be quite shocking. And then you go through these, you probably went through it as well. You go through all these emotions where it's like the initial diagnosis, and then it's like a low, and then maybe a high, and then a low again. And, now it's what do you have in your toolbox to manage those things? Whether that's a diet and eating healthy, what makes you feel like you're working towards healing yourself? What makes you feel like you're ready for those moments where it's low? I'm having a low. So what do you do in those instances where you feel low? Do you reach out to an organization? Do you have certain friends or family that you reach out to? Do you journal? Do you reflect? Do you go to a psychologist? Do you, how do you manage those things? And you kind of put together this toolbox of managing so that you build your resilience. And that's how I would say that, even though, it can seem like I was very energetic and pushing through it. Now, if I were to give the advice, it would be to kind of calmly approach it. And really pay attention to what makes you feel better and what makes you feel like you're growing through this, and use this as a challenge and a stepping stone to be a better version of yourself. I know that's really difficult, but this is an opportunity for you to become this more resilient version of yourself. And there is a strength in that, and there is a heroism in that, I think, for sure.
You say you were lucky, kind of almost lucky, being in that naive state when you were 18, when you got your diagnosis. But then again, it was only 2 years ago you lost the use of your hands, and you could have easily at that point thought, I'm at the age now where this is, this is going to get serious. So you actually almost have had to come through it, a second and third time, I guess, with those relapses. So I guess in itself, like, you have had to go through what older people have had to go through, because that must have gone through your mind at that time.
Oh, you actually make a very valid point. But definitely did go through my mind. It definitely went through my mind where this is the moment. Like,
Yeah.
I'm at that age where it's going to be like I'll be in a wheelchair or something. But that moment where I entertained that thought was very brief, because for me, I don't know what it is about discerning between those thoughts, but then I think, is that thought helpful? No. Like, it's genuinely not going to help me recover, And then what I do this thing, and I've done it since I was younger, where in those really dark moments, I think, what is the worst that can happen? Okay. And I start listing the things that I still can do. So I can still listen to music. I still have people that love me. I can still make those people happy. I can still learn. I can still figure out a way around stuff. And, I'll list all these things. And for me, I don't know if that's just me personally, but it really does make me feel better. It's not so much a gratitude list, but it's like, what do I still have in the worst case scenario? And I just am someone, I don't want to say I am someone, because I think we all have the capability to do this, but I do believe that we have the ability to just look at a situation and choose which way we want to go. I think if you get into the habit of seeing multiple perspectives in a situation, where you're not just going, okay, well, this is it, I'm done. Like, I'm going to be in a wheelchair, my life is over. That's stacking, and that's just anxious thinking. That's not necessarily the truth of the matter.
Yeah.
And you need to get into the habit of self-inquiry and really challenging your own thoughts, because a lot of our thoughts are just gibberish.
Yeah.
So I think for me, 2 years ago, that's basically what I did. I stopped and I just went, this is going to get really bad. Oh my God, I'm doing this. This is horrible. Like, what's going to happen? And then I just went, there's literally no point in thinking that thought. It's not going to make my situation better. That's not healing me. Those thoughts aren't going to make me walk or use my hands again or something, So it's like, okay, this is a situation. How do I adapt to it?
It's the chimp paradox. Have you read that book? You should read it. It's your inner chimp is the one that basically will jump to the worst conclusion. It will be that, and if you let your inner chimp take over, then that your inner animal or inner chimp is in control, and that's when things spiral and get out of control. And that's when you just need to, and it sounds like that's exactly what you did. You have that dialogue with yourself, with your chimp, and you're the one then that takes that over. And I'll be honest, I only read half of the book because it was a bit repetitive, but that was why that was.
I don't have the chimp. I only went that.
But I got what I needed from it. But I think it's having that dialogue with yourself, which is exactly what you say. Otherwise, it's this one-sided conversation that is just all negative.
Completely.
Yeah.
And I think it's practicing getting into that observer mode, where you realize, like,
Exactly.
You have thoughts, but you're not your thoughts, and you have emotions, but you aren't your emotions. So when these things come up, how can I lay them in front of me and actually look at them? And that might be the inner chimp that you're
Yeah.
talking about. Like, you know, there's reactions that we have. We have an innate negativity bias with anything. You know, I think we think like 7 negative thoughts to 1 positive as a reaction. So it's being aware of your own behaviors or the way that you think, and knowing that, you know, something like a chronic illness is an incredible challenge. So obviously there's going to be fear around it. So it's like, how do I work with this fear? How do I manage this fear so that I can keep myself in a positive state all the time, you know, as best I can.
Yeah, of course. What positive things have happened to you that you feel almost definitely wouldn't have happened had you just lived a, you know, seemingly normal life?
Oh man, I reckon everything. Like if I think of the fact that I packed up and moved to a new country at 25, without knowing anyone in that country, like in America, you know, went to live in New York for a year, like traveled, started all these businesses, you know. I think for me, having something like MS has always been something that I've held on to. You know, I really believe in this whole like memento mori, you know, remember you are mortal. Remember that your life is short, so that whenever there's these like insignificant little fights you might have with boyfriends or friends or any of those like really silly stresses, I just remind myself that this is unimportant. And so whenever there's a risk that I think, oh, I'm scared to take, I remember that life is short. And
Yeah.
MS is that reminder for me. I mean, I have it tattooed on my arm as well, but there's also the
Just in
very
case you forget.
visceral, yeah, very visceral reminder that life is short for me. You know, the moment I get pins and needles, I'm like, okay, just remember, like every day is a blessing. Every day that you're here is amazing. You know, you get to see the sky, you get to listen to music, you get to have people that you love. How can you be good today? How can you be a good person? And I think I don't think I would have been like that without MS. So I think my quality of life has been tremendously improved by something that would be so negative and other aspects.
Out of interest, the stuff that you say wouldn't have happened, like moving to a new country, all of that kind of stuff. Why wouldn't have that happened had you not got MS?
I think it would have been, I don't know, I kind of think about my personality before I got MS, and it's very difficult for me to predict that because I got it so young. So it's
Yeah.
not as contrasted as, say, if I got it in my 30s, maybe,
Yeah.
where your personality is a little bit more established. But I've always been a risk taker, but I think I would have been a little bit more complacent. I think it would have been very easy for me to fall prey into a situation possibly where I would wake up at like 40 and look back at my life and gone, oh, I didn't take the risks that I wanted to take. You know, there has been so many instances where I've been terrified to take a risk, but then I remember how the short life is. And that's a reminder from MS. You know, there's been many instances where I, you know, have become very like I feel like I went very deep into philosophy, very deep into personal development, very deep into psychology, because I wanted to learn about myself through this illness, in all aspects as well, but through this illness. And I think maybe it was slightly catapulted because of that. And I think, yeah, I think risk taking, I would have been a little bit more complacent, I would guess, just looking back at my 18-year-old self.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I think it forces you to look at the a side of yourself you wouldn't have looked at otherwise. Because I guess you don't see yourself as normal anymore in a positive way, and you have to just look at the other side. That's certainly been the case for me. I guess my final question, and we did touch upon it earlier, but for someone right now who's listening to this, who's really kind of at the bottom of where where they are going to be in terms of their mental state, what would be your advice in terms of just the next step to take for them onto, because this is all about people's comebacks and believing that a comeback is possible. I love the story of any comeback. If there's a film with a comeback on, I love it. So what would be just that one step forward? What would be your advice?
Well, look, for me, if you're at a low and you're going through chronic illness and you're really dealing with, I don't know what to do next, as someone who's innately a researcher, I would go to resources like this podcast, right? So you've got the podcast, see other people that are doing amazing things, connect to people who have overcome certain challenges, not just chronic illness, but challenges in general. Because I think there's, when you're in a sad, dark state, I think you constantly separate yourself from those people. You think like, oh, but that's them. And I'm not like that. But there needs to be a situation where you're surrounded by those stories, but you also stop and take stock of what are your strengths. So you've clearly done at least a few things that have been impressive that you're proud of, you know. So sit and take stock of what you're proud of and start to work on the fact that you actually can achieve those things if you believe in yourself enough. And I know that sounds super cheesy, but sometimes it really is about our relationship with ourselves, you know, really looking at ourselves going, why do I not believe that I can achieve that? Do I know that for a fact? Do I know that I definitely could never achieve that thing? You know, and how do I learn the skills and the, I guess, self habits and the self perspective that would allow me to be with those people. And I think honestly, the more that you surround yourself with people like that, you know, they say that you are the 5 people that you hang out with the most. But
Yeah.
if you know people who have chronic illness, and even if it's online, because we are during, you know, COVID times where everyone is really stuck inside anyway, so a lot of the online connections that I've made have been really useful. But, you know, joining communities where people are doing amazing things despite it, that's what I would advise. That would be my first step, because then you'll really get those resources to see that an alternate perspective is possible. An alternate reality for yourself is possible. And just knowing that that's possible could be the first step for you believing that it's possible for yourself.
Awesome. And that's just exactly why I wanted to, you know, start the podcast, to have a different community that is focused on the positive side of it, and seeing it, you know, can see it as a blessing. Because we both know, and I think you alluded to it earlier, there is that other online community, and they're not bad people, but they're people just venting negativity about their own situation, and that, whenever I've been in those situations, it drains my positivity. And yeah,
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 completely. I'm exactly the same. You know, I'm very, I have very strict boundaries about who I give my energy to and who I spend time with, online or otherwise, because it is very easy, especially when you're going through something as challenging as this, to fall prey to that darkness and that victimhood. And you really want to seek out these communities where it is a positive thing, and you're thinking about how do I make the best out of this situation. And that's why I was so pleased when you told me about this podcast and you asked me to be on it, because it's such an incredible thing to do, and we really need these stories to be out there, and we need this inspiration and these communities forming, because I think honestly the negative ones are a little bit outweighing the positive ones at the moment. And I don't think that's necessarily a reflection of truth. I don't think that's a reality. I think that's just people maybe being afraid and creating these communities around fear instead of hope.
that was a really good plug for the podcast. That was, I like that. I might use that.
Thank you. I'll be here all day.
Yeah. Look, I think that's a really good and nice point to bring the podcast to a close. If people want to connect with you on Instagram or Facebook, could you maybe just give those details? We'll include them in the show notes as well.
Yeah, so I'm mainly on Instagram. My handle is Millennial Strategist, where I'm a strategy consultant, so I just work with entrepreneurs and mentors. And then I don't really go on Facebook too much, but I do have a website, which is just www.mezgallifuoco, so my name.com.
Yeah.
So if anyone wants to hang out on Instagram, definitely shoot me a DM, and I'm happy to speak to them as well. And I'm happy to connect with anyone, see if I can help.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. Apologies, the connection from the video point of view has kind of been a bit shaky, but I think we've got there in the end. The audio's been okay.
Okay, hopefully it's but thank you so much for having me on here. I feel very privileged, very grateful.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And yeah, we'll catch up soon.